to have you here and to talk about something that I think is near and dear to all of our hearts. We're going to go ahead and go around and give some quick introductions and then tell you a little bit about why we're here. So my name is Steffanie Alexandria Katerina Schilling. You might also know me as Katia Alexandria, and I am a cybersecurity professional, and I also do diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice work, both in my career as well as for this wonderful swing scene that we're in.
My name is Shani Brown. I am a swing dance instructor from Southern California. I have been doing Balboa for 20 years now, and I had a chance to work directly with a lot of the Bobby McGee's dancers who are still around and swinging.
Hey folks, I'll jump in here. Nicolas Centino, I'm an assistant professor at Cal State University, Channel Islands. I'm also a SoCal dancer. I'm also a board member for the Pacific Swing Dance Foundation, and I forgot to put my pronouns on my name, so my pronouns are he, him, his.
Hi, I am Chisomo Selemani. I'm an associate professor, just was promoted. That's why I can't remember my title. I'm an associate professor of communication sciences and disorders at Baltimore University. As it pertains to dancing, the way that I describe myself is I'm a heritage dancer of Zambian dancing, and I also was a dance fit instructor in a dance style called Zoka. So it's an African dance fitness program. So I have some experience and excitement and enthusiasm in the African dance world, but from a slightly different lens. I have been swing dancing on and off for probably about 12 years at this point, but really been in the Balboa world for about 5 to 6 years. Love Balboa, I think it's amazing, and I'm so excited to talk about Balboa in color today. Bobby?
Hi everyone, I'm Bobby White. I'm an international Balboa instructor and Lindy Hop instructor, and I am also do a lot of historical research, and I am honored to call these panelists my friends and my dance partners, and I've learned so much from them, and I'm really excited about today.
We are literally in a historical moment. It is awesome. We are in the largest civil rights movement the world has ever seen. And history is being made. With the death and murder of George Floyd, you had protests in all 50 states across the United States, and you had 60 plus countries around the world on every continent except for one, where, by the way, there's not a lot of people in Antarctica, to talk about civil rights and to try to see what we can do to raise and elevate the playing field for vulnerable members of our community. And so we're super excited to talk to you about today, about why this matters, what we have found out in the past years, talk about the living history of the dance. We have one of the people that the dance was handed directly to, Ms. Shani Brown, and yeah, it's going to be a good conversation. So let's do this.
All right, let's start with a down and dirty history of what it was like back in the day. So Nico put together these great slides. He and I threw together some pictures. What you're seeing here is, by the way, these pictures are pictures that are colorized by modern digital technology. So it's not a 100% accurate representation, but as you can see, they're doing some amazing things with colorization and digital stuff. I don't know if it's possible, but if you look at the crowd, if you look at the people dancing here, you're gonna see a representation of what it was like dancing back in Los Angeles back in the day. Due to movies, right? So those Hollywood movies, when most of those Hollywood movie scenes, the dancing is segregated. You either have scenes of white dancers dancing, or you have scenes of black dancers dancing. And that was, as you can probably imagine, for Hollywood, it was important for them to be able to show these pictures, to show these dance floors in areas across the country that might not be ready yet for segregated dance scenes. But the dance floors themselves often had lots of groups of people around, of Black Americans, Asian Americans, Latinx Americans. And so this is, these are all taken, some of these pictures are taken from a from a big dance festival that they held in 1939. You'll see some of the, you'll see names that you know, like Hal Takier and Roy Damron and Betty Takier. You'll see them in these pictures, but we're gonna concentrate on some of those other dancers that are back there. So this right here is a picture taken from Central Avenue. Central Avenue was called the Little Harlem of Los Angeles. And it was really popular for a lot of people to go to Central Avenue, for a lot of non-Black Californians to go to Central Avenue to see the great shows and to do dancing there. And Roy Damron himself often went with groups, with his group of friends, to dancing on Central Avenue. And he said that when he would go there, they would dance with each other. So white kids were dancing with Black kids. He said that they did everything that the white dancers did. This is Balboa, this is Bal-Swing, this is swing, this is Lindy Hop, this is shag. And back in the day, the dancing was not as in boxes as we tend to think of it today. Like we tend, you go to your Balboa event and learn Balboa class, and dance Balboa that night, or you go to your Lindy Hop event and maybe dance Lindy Hop. And these dancers were really mixing their dances quite a lot. So each dancer probably knew some Balboa, some swing, some Lindy, some shag by the 1940s, when it was becoming when all those dances were mixing and mingling in that space. Roy Damron happened to say of pure Balboa, he said, yes, everyone did pure Balboa. You had to when the music got really fast.
I just want to answer a quick question that we had on the thing, that yes, Lionel Hampton did live in California for a while, and he played on Central Avenue quite a bit. This is actually where he was playing for Louis Armstrong, that he was picked up by the Benny Goodman Band when they came out in 35 and 36 to play. So if you heard Central Avenue and mentioned in his songs, that is the Central Avenue he's talking about.
Duke Ellington also had a residency in LA during the Jump for Joy production. And he also had a nightly venue at the Casa Mañana. So, if a lot of the old timers would refer to this as one of their favorite venues in LA. And I really like how Bobby brings up that, Central Avenue is sort of the Black Broadway of LA, was a place where non-Black dancers would come. And, the specific part of that being, non-Black dancers. And so a lot of times we think about race relations in the United States as this Black-white binary. But LA, of the 30s, even before then, was really this polyracial community, this metropolis where you had, as Bobby mentions, right, Asian Americans, Latinx folks, and also folks who are sort of on the margins of whiteness. And so you have folks who are Middle Eastern, right? You have folks like Hal Takier, who was from, his family was from Turkey. Ann Mills, whose family was Armenian. So, our senses and ideas around race, as we understand it in the 2020s, right? Race as a social construct is something that folks may have had a different understanding of who was in the family of whiteness and who wasn't in the 30s versus our modern understanding of it today.
So what you're seeing here is a really cool picture. This was taken at the International Swing Dance Championships that they threw in 1939. They threw it for a few years, and this was one of those big stadium-sized contests. In this group, the front couple has like a banner that says Illinois. To the right of them is Hal and Betty Takier, our Balboa legends. To the left of them and to the back of them, the dancer dancing more in a shag pattern, those are Black American Californian dancers who were also on the Ray Rand Swingers team that Hal Takier and Maxie Dorff and Betty Takier and Venna Archer, they were all on a team called the Ray Rand Swingers. Now that wasn't necessarily a tightly knit group of team. Like it's not like they just, it was kind of like a lot of dancers who would be used for gigs and that kind of stuff. However, they did do, according to historian Peter Loggins, they did do exhibition dances with the Black couples and the white couples dancing at the same time, which is not something, for instance, that you saw outside of New York, for instance. In New York, the Whitey's Lindy Hoppers had some teams that were white Americans, but they tended not to perform with those outside of Manhattan. So here we just get the sense that Los Angeles, like Manhattan, is pretty cosmopolitan at this time. That dancer on the left is Ricky Birch. Ricky Birch. I'll say that name one more time because it might come up at some point this weekend. Ricky Birch. He is the dancer in Cabin in the Sky, which is a 1940s film. And it's one of the few film footage that we have of the Black American California dancers swing dancing. By that time, they are mostly doing Lindy Hop. However, I think if you look at it the way a bow person would look at toss-outs, you would see that I think to me, it's pretty obvious that these are swing dancers, as in bow swing dancers, that learned how to Lindy Hop after they had done bow swing. They also take a lot of inspiration from their Southern Californian Lindy dancers like Jewel McGowan, like a lot of the way that their movement is very much in that Southern California Lindy aesthetic that we think of. So it's a really beautiful mixture of those three dance styles: Harlem Lindy Hop, which they were learning from people like Whitey's Lindy Hoppers who were coming and performing on Central Avenue; the Southern California Lindy Hop style, which they were learning around them; and the swing and bow swing mechanics that they had learned first before Lindy Hop came into California. All right, this photo is Ernstid Davidson and Herman Harrison. They're winners of the quote Negro unquote division at the International Jitterbug Convention in 1939. You can see some other pictures of them. They appear to be doing shag. Unfortunately, we don't have video footage of the event, so we don't know for sure what they're doing dance-wise.
And it's really interesting that, right, that there is a quote unquote Negro division in this contest. And so it speaks to sort of the ways in which race relations play out in LA that might be different than other parts of the country. And so thinking about Los Angeles as being not necessarily a quote unquote Jim Crow state, right? That, you know, legal segregation as it's understood in the South doesn't necessarily exist in the same types of way in California. And so what you would see were a stronger emphasis on, in terms of how venues were segregated, a stronger emphasis on elements of de facto segregation, or segregation that people just culturally understood are the rules of engagement in everyday life, as opposed to there being, like you would see in the South, a sign that would say no coloreds, right, or whites only. And so a good example of that is this sign, this bulletin sign that would be outside of certain movie theaters in LA. And so as you can see from the sign, it doesn't necessarily say that, you know, this theater is whites only, but you have designated nights for different racial groups, right? So you have, you know, presumably a night for Black folks on Thursday, a night for Latinx folks on Wednesday. And it's just assumed that you go to the theater on the night that's designated for you, which is very different, right? Well, not that much different, but in terms of in the eyes of the law, different than there being this very explicit racial form of segregation. Shani, I know you have some thoughts on de jure de facto.
So while we did have, just want to make sure I'm off. Yeah. While we did have a lot of what we call de facto, the sort of, it's implied that there is an all-white night, or there is nights specifically for different racial groups, we did have de jure, quote-unquote, legal racist policies in California. Up until 1927, we had specific beaches that were ordinanced through legal means that were only available to Black folks, and Black folks were not allowed to go to other beaches. We also had, as Nico's putting up, redlining, which was the Federal Housing Association's way of tying loans for houses to racial issues. So what you see are the red, meaning you're not likely to get a home loan. And those are all predominantly, even on the coast where you see, those are predominantly Black neighborhoods. Venice Beach, Manhattan Beach, and parts of Santa Monica were actually an almost very prominent Black neighborhood in the early 1920s. And this went on until the 50s and 60s, and then they began to break down the ability for redlining to be a legal process. But it was something that did exist in LA. However, you had a lot of places that were fully integrated. You had certain ballrooms that were fully integrated, but did you go to the Santa Monica Pier Ballroom if you were a person of color? Probably not. You could be run out, but you could technically go. So this is the kind of complex history that you have in California. A lot of people who are African American actually came out, not in the early waves right out of the Jim Crow South, but they actually came out after going to New York or to Chicago. Then they come out west to try to get away from what they saw as more de jure racism, more legal racism, racist practices. And they came out to California just trying to give it a risk. And if it didn't work, they went home, they went somewhere else. But it was a wild, wild west town still in that sense, where they had an opportunity.
Right, and as you know, Shani's pointing out, a lot of the beachfront property, right, was off limits to folks of color. And so when you hear people say, you know, Balboa is a white dance, right? Well, the Balboa Rendezvous was a segregated ballroom, but you had rebellious white kids and white passing Latinx kids taking the dance that they're seeing at the ballroom back to their integrated neighborhoods, and it sort of disseminates from there. And so, yes, in fact, Newport Beach, you know, the Balboa Peninsula, that ballroom was in fact, you know, sort of off limits to folks of color, but doesn't necessarily mean that that dance didn't sort of escape, right, on the backs of rebellious kids that went.
Something that I want to call out, I actually joined Laura and Jeremy's beginner fundamental Balboa class this weekend, and it was great, and something that I was honestly moved to tears with is that they addressed our media and our media's institution and defining roles as gatekeeper and in racism. And so when we see a lot of footage or when we see a lot of videos of white people doing the swing dances, not only did it happen in Lindy Hop, where obviously we had these dance sequences that were taken out of movies, but gatekeeping also happened in another way where people couldn't even get into those films or be chosen by the producers and the casting agents. And so the lens in which we are viewing a lot of our history through itself is systematically biased. And it's important that when we're seeing these things to recognize just who was actually present. And to Nico's point, this conversation goes far beyond the black and white dichotomy, which race in the United States is often talked about.
And that really leads us to our last few history slides, so we can get into our conversations about things that we can do now and experiences now. Thinking about, you know, integrated neighborhoods, and specifically the one that is kind of near to my heart, Boyle Heights. And Boyle Heights being a mixed race neighborhood. It was originally a Jewish neighborhood. Then you had an influx of Issei and Nisei, Japanese Americans. And then after that, you had an influx of Mexican Americans. And swing being sort of the teen pop thing to do at the time, right? You had all these kids sort of interested in the music and the dance. And so this is a picture of some Mexican American jitterbugs, and they've got their sort of, you know, zoot suit inspired outfits on that was referred to as sort of jitterbug clothes. And within Ball Heights, you know, they have a handful of high schools that were largely integrated. And so this is a yearbook photo from Roosevelt High in Ball Heights, and you can, you know, as pointed out by this big yellow arrow, a young Willie Desitoff. And if you look just to his right, we've got, you know, presumably a young Nisei man. And as you kind of pan the faces in this high school guardsman's club photo from his yearbook, you know, you have phenotypically Black faces, right? You've got some phenotypically Latinx faces, and the faces of folks that you would presume would be European most likely are the sons of immigrants.
Yeah, I'd love to just really quick point out how much the old timers, when they talk about their dancing, how much they talk about it being linked to like their high school or their neighborhood. And so Willie Desitoff in this group of people, you know, they were interacting with each other. And Roy Damron himself said that absolutely the dancing that they saw the Black dancers do in the ballrooms was absolutely influential to his group of friends from his high school. And like, so there was definitely lots of passing of ideas that were going on.
A question
even if they weren't, even if they weren't able to go to the same ballrooms, they were experiencing things like dancing at school or nightclubs or in the park, whatever, with their friends. So there was cultural exchange, and there possibly was some style differences, but from all accounts that we can figure out, they were all doing the same dances. So while styles might vary from individuals in any way, they were all still sharing, even if they couldn't always frequent the same ballrooms. But we did have integrated ballrooms. Go on.
A question to the panelists from Eli is, since the dance scene was subject to segregation, did the dance aesthetics change between the various groups of dancers?
Well, I think Shani, on top of Shani's answer to that she just mentioned, something that Roy said. The reason why I know so many things that Roy said is because we did 9 hours of interview with him for the PSDF. Roy said that the way that when he would go to Central Avenue, the way that the dancers he saw, the Black dancers dancing there, tended to dance he said everything they did but looser. So I think there was in Roy's opinion, there was more of a looseness to their dancing than his group of friends, at least.
And I was gonna jump in here. In my dance journey, especially since my dance is influenced directly from my African dance background, in working with Bobby, one of the things that we talked about was that very same point. Like there might be some looseness that's just naturally in my body that could be used, that could be reflective of the original dancers a little bit. And so, and even in some of our classes, we've worked on that theme and seen students embody more of the spirit of the original dancers by embodying this looseness. So I think thinking about that is a really cool thing about how the past can inform our future. So I think we're segueing, Nico.
I actually want to jump on that real quick, Chisomo, is that you saying that reminded me of, we had a cowbell. There seems to be this thing where it's an event where all of our friends love and go. And for somehow, now for the past running years, I have been graced to hang out with a bunch of my friends who are people of color, randomly in a back corner messing around. And something really interesting happened that I've noticed is that actually all of our dancing, it was no longer, I feel like, the very tight Balboa that the general international scene is used to. It was looser, it was funkier, and there was so much joy there, because I think that there was literally a freedom to express yourself without being told that how you want to dance Balboa is wrong. And when we look at people, right, like I am African American, I am a woman, like we are all these things simultaneously. And it's nice to be able to bring your full self and your authentic self to something that you love, rather than being told, oh no, that part of you have to check at the door to go ahead and exist in this community or to do this dance. So.
Did want to leave this lasting image though, and these are two folks that are in this picture in an internment camp during World War II. And so, thinking about how, as we talk about and discuss, right, issues of race and issues of oppression, that this has been a long-going conversation within sort of the world of swing.
So do we want to talk about where we are? What's going on?
So one of the reasons why we're here, I can just give it to Nico's point, is that this is a long-standing conversation. If you are new to this conversation, we're excited to have you. If you are if you've been part of it, then we're excited to continue this conversation with you. This panel in its various forms have come about because, honestly, because of mentorship and friendship, and then very real pressing issues that we face currently. I have been swing dancing for a little over a decade, and whether it's in, I'm just gonna be honest, Lindy Hop or Balboa or the other dances, I have always had one foot out the door. I've had one foot out the door because of racist and microaggressive behaviors, to just flat out aggressive and racist behaviors that I have experienced. And it's a question of, I love these dances, but is there a way for me to exist inside these dances and to be myself and to not have these dances cause me pain? And I have the privilege of having Valerie Saustrom as a dance mom up here in Cleveland. And we were talking one day and we were working on things, and she was like, you know what? You should go talk to Shani. And I'm like, come again, say what? Who's that? And this is after I have been dancing like Balboa for several years. And when I found out that there is this wonderful person and this wonderful dancer who is a person of color, who is a Black woman and is a pro Balboa dancer, I was like, how has it taken me this long to find out that Shani exists? And so what I did is I promptly sent Shani a message to someone. I ended up booking what we thought was going to be a 2-hour private lesson. It was a 2-hour, oh my gosh, it was a 2-hour therapy session. It was so interesting to have a teacher not only be able to talk to us and to see us in our full selves, but also to be able to understand the racism that we face every time we walk into a swing classroom or into a ballroom. And to not necessarily have it explained. It's okay to have those conversations, but to understand and to not question and to be able to feel that pain with us. I mean, I think we had a wonderful friend who was a lead join us, and I think he got really confused at one point because he just had three women around him sobbing. And you might be wondering, why is this important? Because we are trying to take these conversations from these intimate places and from behind closed doors and in chat messengers and in hotel rooms to bring them out, because they affect all of us. I truly believe that when we equal that when we level the playing field and we increase diversity and inclusion and equity and justice across our communities, that not only do the people in the vulnerable populations benefit, but we as a community benefit. We as a community benefit because we have more ideas, we have more like literally strength and togetherness.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for listening to our stories. As Steffanie was talking about her experience having one foot out the door, like this reminds us of the phrase, the revolving door. And so there are people who might see Balboa or might see swing and think, oh, I'm going to give that a try, but then step in and immediately step out because they don't have that particular type of resilience to keep them there. And so when we ask the question, why should we talk about this? Why is this important? And many people might be engaged in conversations specific to race, considering the current global climate. And you might be tired, but the thing I would ask us to think about is when you have one ism, there's several isms behind that as well. And so Steffanie reminded us of our intersectional identities, the fact that when we start to dig into issues of race and we start to make life, and we start to elevate voices of the marginalized, that doesn't just stay with one particular group, because when we think about systems of oppression, then we start to reflect on the current state. So these are really important topics. But going back to this idea of the revolving door, you might wonder, like, why aren't there very many people of color in Balboa? And I know as we started, I was told by many people, well, there weren't really, like, I would say, like, oh, well, I don't really have very many people to look at. When I look across the ballroom, very few people move like me. And the response was usually, well, the original dancers didn't look like you. The original dancers were white. So, and so now we have this very robust history knowing that that's not the truth. And so I think it's first important for us to recognize that the past that we have is incorrect. And then moving forward, we need to ask the questions about what can we do? How can we address a very serious bias? And so any other thoughts from the panelists?
I mean, building off of what you said, the reason we're sharing this with you because we didn't know. Shani is such a crazy wealth of knowledge. She is one of the women of color. She's one of the only dancers that these wonderful dances that we love were literally handed down to keep going and preserve. And after our private with Shani, I went back to Dance Mom and I was like, Valerie, did you know that there were literally original dancers of color of Balboa? And she went, who did you hear that from? And I went, Shani. And bless Valerie's heart, she was like, oh shit, she would know. And I was like, right. And so we started this crusade, and we tagged Bobby and we tagged Lewis and we tagged other people who we knew were doing historian work to say, honestly, just someone and I were like, we need this for our soul. We need this for our soul because we love this dance, because every time that we step into the ballroom, it is an act of resistance for us. And we need help persisting. And I always have the feeling that if I am feeling like that, then I guarantee that other people are out there are feeling like that too. Sorry, Shani, you were going to say something.
No, just it was interesting that I didn't know the names like of Ricky or of some of the other dancers. Off the top of my head, I'm always terrible with names, but I'd seen the pictures of the Ray Ran Swingers having two Black people or two Black partnerships in the group, and I was like, well, they're them. But even beyond that, when I started dancing with the original dancers, I was very keenly aware that some of them were Latinx. Some of them were, as we were talking about Ann Mills, she was Armenian. Hal was Turkish, Armenian, also from the same area. And it's similar to the way that a lot of Syrians, like they were leaving a diaspora at the end of World War I to get out of their countries, and they came and made their way to America. They were immigrants. By the time that I was meeting them, they had, quote unquote, you could have called them passing for white. However, their experiences were not the typical white American experience. So they were different people to me. There were, like I said, there was Natalie Esparza, there was her husband, Tony. There were other people of color who were still doing these dances. And I felt seen in their community. I wanted to actually go in and point out something that I didn't feel comfortable in the Lindy Hop community. I did the dance in Southern California. We do all dances. We do Lindy, we do Shag, we do Balboa, but I didn't feel comfortable going and watching Lindy Hop events because I felt there was much more moments of minstrelsy, of either recreating very African-American cultural things that were either asked of African-Americans or specific to their culture that they were doing when they were dancing and displaying, that then was being recreated by generally white bodies that didn't understand what they were recreating. And it always made me uncomfortable. Balboa and generally like Southern California swing dances and Shag didn't have these moments of minstrelsy as much, so I felt much more comfortable in the community. Was I still just one of a handful of people? And by the way, Katja, I saw you before you ever saw me, because I was already in the mode of when I saw other people of color come into this community over the 20 years that I've been doing it, I did just take note of them, even if I wasn't going to go grab them up at every moment and support them at all times. I just wanted to keep an eye out so that if I needed to do those things, that I could be there to do that. So I didn't feel alone, and I also didn't feel, but I often felt erased because people forget that I am a Black woman of color. And because I ended up with straight hair, they end up forgetting that I am still a body of color in their space. And I think it's important to note that.
There's this element of hypervisibility and invisibility for dancers of color, and I assume for Black dancers especially. This element of, you know, if you've hung around long enough that your race kind of becomes invisible, right? You kind of become a part of the landscape, but also, right, your phenotype, your skin tone, your skin color, right, also makes you completely hyper visible in those spaces as well, right? And not always as a welcome presence sometimes.
There's also the interesting issue of colorism. So Chisomo raised the point that I forget what competition it was, but she looked at me and she was like, when was the last time that there was a Black woman in amateur finals? And we were sitting there, we think about it, and we're like, literally not to our knowledge since Shani ended up just rising through the ranks and being the rock star that we know and love today. And it's interesting because I started looking around, and a lot of, I started noticing people's behavior towards me and towards Chisomo, and there's a lot of interesting research to back this, where I cannot in Balboa be the archetype for what we deem as acceptable as a Black woman. And if you do not know what colorism is, it is oppressive thinking inside of people of color. And so you actually have things like, this is horrible, but I'm going to share this with you, the brown paper test bag, where Black girls will go ahead and put their skin next to a school lunch bag. And if you're lighter than like that brown paper bag, then you're pretty. But if you're darker, then you're not. And it goes into this very colonialist, imperialist mindset that the closer to white you are, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we have a question do you think that the way Bal is taught currently makes it difficult for people of color to really invest in the dance and its evolution? And I think because of the social factors that we just talked about related to colorism and hypervisibility and invisibility, and then also a slight connected point to that, as we were preparing for this, we talked about, in Lindy Hop, we talk a lot about performing Blackness, but in Balboa, performing whiteness. I think that oftentimes people of color are, and I'm going to speak for myself as a Black person, I think there are times where I felt invited to perform whiteness versus to embody how to embody movement within what my body does and how it's structured. And so I think the first step of embracing the fact that historically these dances were a little bit more integrated and they were a little bit more diverse. I think that first step will help inform our teaching as we move forward. And so I will go ahead and say, yes, I do think that the way that we currently teach Balboa makes it difficult for people to be invested in it. And there's always the question of where should it go? Because I've heard a lot, X is not Balboa. Right, and so we have to, I think, honor what is Balboa and what is not, but I think sometimes we hold too rigidly to what is because of our flawed understanding of the past.
Ooh, I'm gonna give a shout out to Ursula. Ursula just threw in a question, but it's a comment. Ursula Hicks just said, it almost feels like a form of code switching. And I would say, absolutely. I have realized sometimes the manner in which I dance Balboa with other people of color is very different than when I dance with people who are not bio POC. If you don't know that term, it's Black, Indigenous people of color, and sometimes it's not because I'm not trying. There are times where I try to bring the same looseness or the same joy or the same more or less expressiveness to a dance that I'm having with someone who is white. And it's so interesting because as a follow, I feel like it's constant, nope, 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 nope. And the dance gets very controlling and I start being told what I am not allowed to do as a form of movement and expression.
I'm a little on the fence about the answer to the question, only because I know there are teachers, and I would boldly put myself in that category, who do not teach in such a way that restricts entry. However, I would love if Bobby wanted to elaborate on that, because he has some great ideas for how we talk about these dances in the classroom.
Yeah. So this is something that, I've done a lot of soul searching on over the years, and I don't have all the perfect answers yet. And so it's, it's a continual journey for all of us. Some thoughts to throw out. Yes, the second, sorry, my brain just went.
Didn't mean to throw you on the spot. Well, I'll start with the idea that I go by root movements, right? The idea that there are things that we can speak to that are being different than in Balboa, than different in Lindy Hop, than different in Shag. There is a root in the physics of a movement. Now that physics of that movement and that structure is going to look a little different on each person's body, individually different on everybody's body, but there is a basic sense of that movement, and we can talk about those things. And if we try to reach for those root movements, then we're not being as we're not micromanaging our students and asking them to also dance towards an aesthetic and not towards the movement of a dance. Bobby, you got something?
Yeah, and I really think that one of the fundamental, I think one of the biggest things that the Balboa scene needs to get over as a whole, or that we need to move past, or that we need to reprogram into our spirit and the way that we dance, is that these dances, I think that we forget that these dances are more like party dances than they are like a modern ballroom silver medallion competition dance, right? And in the sense that, like, the modern sport ballroom is like when you do your foxtrot, you do this, 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 and this, and they're clearly looking for you to do this, 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 and this in a very specific way, right? Versus the idea that like these were dances that were invented not by one person, but by a community of people dancing to a music that inspires very much, not a very codified system of how you dance to it. And like Shani said, like there are like it can be really beautiful that we have these specific collection of mechanics, or these collections of you know, like these are the things that pretty much make it Bal-Swing. These are the things that pretty much make it Lindy Hop, like that kind of thing. However, I think those are a lot looser than we in the modern scene give it credit for. And I think that the the modern emphasis on vocabulary and on being able to do very intricate, fancy things, I think can be very limiting, not only towards people's creativity and towards their emotional expression, but also it can be bodily limiting, right? Like to expect to exist in the dance as a means of trying to do, oh, my purpose in this dance I'm about to have with this person is to see if I can do X, Y, or Z, right? Like that is a controlling way of looking at the dance, right? As opposed to saying, when I ask this person to dance, let's see what happens, right? Let's see what we can make together, whatever that is, regardless of like, of what box that we would want to put it in.
Can I jump in? And Shani, to your point, there are wonderful instructors that are teaching in what I would call a culturally responsive way. So that's not to say that they're not there. I just wonder how available those instructors are to anyone who decides to step into Balboa.
And as a whole, right? Like, though something to acknowledge is that the majority of the pro instructors have been white bodies and therefore coming with a certain perspective, and there's no offense to that, but that's just been the majority. So I understand. Yeah, right.
And then to what Bobby just said, so some of you all might know that Bobby and I competed together at Hot Rhythm Holiday. The process of preparation for that and the competition was one of my greatest dancing experiences of my life. Because as we were preparing, it really was an experiment of what can we do with these mechanics in a way that makes sense to our bodies and how our bodies connect, versus like, we're going to do X, Y, Z things. And so I personally, we're talking a lot about the hard things in the dance, and I think we should definitely do that. But I want to say also some of the great experiences that I've had, and that was amazing. So those of you who were there, you got to see us dancing, and it was just so fun. Steffanie, I think you wanted to say something.
I was going to just ask for any of our wonderful community members who are joining us, if you have questions, if you can do me a favor and throw them in the question and answers. There's a lot of chatter going on in the chat box, which is awesome. Absolutely talk to each other. I just don't want them to get lost, so we can try to actually have a conversation with you guys.
I've been fielding them over, Steffanie, too. If they don't get answered, I've been telling them to post them. So
you are awesome. One of the questions that did pop up, it goes back a little way, but Gary asked, do we know whether other ballrooms were as unsegregated as some of the LA ballrooms were in the 30s and 40s? Was the presence of non-Black dancers of color, was there a presence of non-Black dancers of color in New York or other cities?
Ooh, I had responded to Gary in the chat that could be its own like almost 3 to 4 to 5 hour conversation. LA's tricky. I'll just kind of give it the thumbnail sketch. LA's really tricky because you have a spectrum. You have a spectrum of dance venues, right? Where some were strictly white only, right? And that was just an understood thing, right? It wasn't necessarily legal to bar entry to folks at the door, but if you had a stern doorman, or if you gave people enough dirty looks for patrons of color, that you get the message, right? You've had other venues that were quite integrated. You had other venues that were split up, right, as seen by that sign, by the night. So people's memory of their youth, right, people's memory of this time can be radically different from their peers, precisely because LA was such a metropolis, right, was such a contextual space in terms of where you live, what neighborhood, what part of LA County you're from. And so a lot of times we'll encounter these very contradictory narratives about what it was like during the 30s and 40s. And in truth, you know, those contradicting narratives can coexist precisely because of the diversity experiences, right? And a lot of those diversity experiences come down to, as we've mentioned, right, elements of colorism, elements of, right, class background, elements of, you know, gender, and so on and so forth. So luckily there's a lot of resources around this area. Bobby has really synthesized a lot of this information on his blog, Swung Over. There's work both within the dance communities and also within the broader academic communities around this history as well. And so we can definitely provide resources and more info for folks that want to dig into the history.
I wanted to just posit to everybody to understand that even in this present moment, we have gaps in our knowledge, right? A lot of the academic research that our community has done in the last 25, 30 years have been predominantly in major resources that are accessible to everybody, which tend to be resources produced by white communities, right? Whether that be the major, you know, Hearst as a paper man, or somebody, you know, who at Warner Brothers who's picking out people to film. We are in that sense, but there is resources out there. There are resources out there all over the place that we haven't gone and gotten. Now, we've always looked for first-person interviews, but as Nico said, people have different memories of what things are like. And even those memories, those oral histories might be, thank you, Valerie, those oral histories might be not as perfectly accurate as we would want. So we do need to get other resources to sort of help build that bigger picture, to contextualize those oral histories. And those are gaps in our knowledge that we don't have, that we are trying, you know, Bobby's been working on a lot of stuff and brought out some cool blogs on Harlem. I've been doing some research with another friend, trying to fill in gaps in our knowledge in LA. And everybody in their local towns probably could find different resources than, say, your regular paper, and find out more information about what their communities of color were like, or what they were doing around these dances in their local areas. Yeah. Valerie just pointed out it's important to gather histories of non-superstars, like just everyday people, because they're a big part of the fabric of what was happening. Not to mention that superstardom, or people that tend to get picked out, there's a story built around that we have to decontextualize and understand as well.
And also it's a part of, you know, reframing what it is that we're looking for. And, you know, as been mentioned, right, thinking about the spirit of that era. For me, you know, looking into the past and specifically looking for a body of steps around this, you know, subgenre of LA swing, this Pachuco hop, right? I was trying to figure out, you know, what did the steps look like? What did the moves look like? And what I discovered was, it wasn't a body of steps, it was a spirit, right? It was a spirit of to the dance. And, you know, looking at being guided through Bobby McGee's footage with March Takir, and her looking at Natalie and Tony's dancing and saying, that's a Pachuco move, that's a Pachuco move, and that's a Pachuco move, right? As a modern observer, it all looks like Bal-Swing to me, right? For those who have that eye, you see that spirit of the dance coming through, even though it's not necessarily, right, a specific set rubric.
And that's so interesting. That actually segues into a question that was asked. Laura Heat asked, I'd love to know from each of you, or those who are willing to share, if and when you've had an amazing freeing bow dance, what feels different when dancing, feels more restrictive, or when you're code switching? And I can kick that off. Laura, for me, one of the things that I feel is kind of what Nico was getting to, is that there's a freedom, and there's not, and it's kind of what to Bobby said, where there's not a set rubric, that I can bring in other parts of me and other dances that I do, that do take from African-American culture, and that I can Balboify it. And that, you know what, that is also okay. And so like the intention or some of the movement might be there, but it might fit the timing, it might fit the music, it tries to still honor that connection. And it's interesting because I feel, what I often feel is that when I try to do that with someone who is often not a person of color, and this is interesting too, because I've noticed it regardless of how I'm a predominant follow, regardless of how high my leader is, that there is a resistance for me to express that idea, because it's not part of our normal nomenclature. It's not part of our normal vocabulary. And it's interesting because that also gets back to looking at how do we know the things that we know, and realizing that history in itself, in the way that it is often told, is told through an incredibly biased lens.
So anybody?
Sorry, there were lots of questions.
Thank you.
I was trying to tackle a question in the text. What's interesting about the things that we're talking about is that there's so many things that are intangible, and there's so many things that are that have to do with a culture, right? So I, being an immigrant, having been born in Zambia and crossed the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean multiple times, I've learned how to operate and to adjust the way that I am in the different environments in which I exist. And so that goes back to the idea of code switching, right? So I primarily ask myself the question, how can I make the people around me feel comfortable? How can I assimilate or connect in a way that will promote connection? And so what that leads to is me infrequently feeling invited, because I'm often anticipating how my communication partner or my dance partner is going to receive me. And especially because I look different from the vast majority of people who do Balboa. I am, for those of you taking my class, you'll see, or for those of you who see the demo, you'll see that I'm a very curvy, short human. And so I can see somebody's discomfort just with my physical being before we even start dancing. So when I step into a dance with Steffanie, or with or with Bobby, Laura, any of the people on this panel, people that I know who have invited me into their world, I will dance differently with them. And it is a little bit more freeing. And so I say all of that to ask yourself a question, like, what are your expectations as you connect with somebody? Because you may not realize that all of that's going on in my head. I want so badly to fit in that I will do the thing that looks like what you're trying to ask me to do, versus just be me. And so I think when you're approaching that as somebody who wants to be an ally, or somebody who wants to be inviting, you can ask questions like, how do you like to be connected? How would you like to be connected to me? Like, even as a short follow, often leads will just assume where they should like wrap their arms. And I'm often like hanging out, hanging out here, trying to get my shoulder down. So even just asking questions as you engage with somebody, how would you like to connect? Yeah, so that's my long response to that. Shani?
I'll just be really quick. I have a skewed perspective on this, simply because I am unapologetically me all the time when I'm social dancing. And part of that is the culture that I came to before dancing, which was body movement and growing up dancing around with the family and stuff all the time. So there was a sense of like, I was just comfortable with me and my body moving around in space. But then I also, when I started dancing in what I would call the major Balboa scene, because I didn't do that for a long time. I only danced at Bobby McGee's and Golden Sails with a lot of the old timers, and I didn't go out to a lot of local dances and dance in the younger quote unquote community. But when I did, I was coming with all this other knowledge and respect of having danced with a bunch of other original dancers, that I just didn't care if they didn't like what I was doing as much either. Competitions are a different thing, but that's more about me in competitions. I'm not sure than about my color visibility in the space. So I'm unapologetically me, and I wish more people would all be like that as they learn those dances from the ground up, to continue to be them, and then it'll feel more expressive as they go along. So.
I also think, Shani, to your point though, that when you look at the research, that permission is almost needed. Something that exists when it comes to someone who is in a vulnerable population. And so we're talking about people of color right now, but we really could be talking about sexual orientation. We could be talking about cisgendered or whatever else. Is this feeling of double or multiple consciousness? So I know how I can act with my Black family in New York. Most of you don't because you're not around there. I also know if I act like that around people who are not used to that or in that culture, that they're going to be thrown off, and that a lot of times we have a negative reaction to things that are different. And so not only do I know how to function in all Black spaces, I also know how to function in all white spaces. And I often will function in a way that is palatable, so you do not feel threatened, so you do not attack me. It is literally a survival mechanism.
Bobby, did you want to say something?
Yeah, those are fantastic points. And for the person, you know, a way that Chisomo and I use this when we introduce our classes in terms of like individuality and the inherent spirit of individuality in the dance. Imagine Willie Desitoff, right? Like wiggly-legged, wiggly-ankled Willie Desitoff. And imagine if you didn't see him on film ever, and he walks into a dance floor today and dances his Bal-Swing. I think a lot of people would be like, well, that's not Bal-Swing, because that doesn't look at all like Maxi Dorf. Like, I don't understand what's going on here. Let that be like a guiding post. Let that be like a proverb that you kind of keep inside of you, that like Willie Desitoff was himself in a very different way than any other dancers that we've seen, right? Like he's very individual, and he's like one of the greatest, you know, he's one of our like greatest legends of all time in terms of how we regard this dancing. And so that's something I wanted to throw out there for you.
You just described how I came to Balboa, actually. I saw Willie in a video playing in a bedroom and went, I've seen Balboa, but what is that? And I want to do that. How do I get there? And when I met him, one of the things he did teach me was it's about learning the movement and learning yourself, how it works. And just, if that's what you like, you go out and you make it better and you keep doing it. And I'm glad I had that encouragement.
In the interest of time, we actually are going to bring the PowerPoints back up just because we have a couple other talking points that I think will help us guide and finish and round out our conversation.
I want to throw in a thought here as we start. I'm going to quote Maya Angelou: "When we know better, we do better." So this conversation should hopefully promote asking questions and reflection. As an instructor, as a swing dance instructor, as an instructor in higher ed, I often ask my students to reflect, and they often hate it. And I have professionals, I have students, I have all sorts of different people who say, reflect. Why? Why do we reflect? We reflect because that teaches us how to learn. It teaches us how to know better. So we are in this process of evolution. We may not have specific answers. We're getting into some concrete steps right now, but I would call us to continue to ask questions and to continue to work towards knowing better so that we can continue to move the dial forward.
And my tag team on that is not only to try to reflect, but also to try to realize that we all play a part in upholding systems of oppression. And that there's really interesting research. Well, first of all, we will never arrive, right? We will never be anti-racist. It's not a place that we can get to, and we're all on our different journeys. And as we continue to grow and to learn and reflect, we can go ahead to do better, to help support and love and honor and elevate those around us who need it. But also to realize that so that thing that we say in class where it's like the instructor is like, if I say something, assume I'm talking to you. If we say something, assume we're talking to you. There's really interesting research. I was reading this last week, a research study about allyship and advocacy in the workplace based upon race. And 85% of white men and 75% of white women think that they are good allies for people of color in their workplace. 15% of Latina and Latinx women and I think it's 12% of Black women actually agree with that. And so to recognize that we all have learning and growing to do, and to try to take this in, to reflect, and also to realize that like we're all in this together, but also that you have a personal responsibility. And so part of what we did when this group is a wonderful group, and we've talked about it a couple of times, and we've also chatted to prepare for, once again, this panel. And so we came up with a couple of things that we think would be just great takeaways and actions. The first one that we have up here is think about what it means to be an ally and show actionable support. It takes a majority to change systems of oppression, and dancers of color should not be solely responsible for stopping oppression that simultaneously oppresses us. I would say that without the majority, that this change is not possible. Like, I cannot stop my own oppression, if that makes sense. Does anyone else want to chime in?
I think we're the next slide, maybe.
Sure. And also the, actionable, it's not actionable like lawsuit actionable. It's actionable in terms of, I think a lot of us on the panel have seen sort of performative allyship where, it's a lot of pretty words, but ultimately there's no there. And we're really looking for, right, folks taking measures and steps to correct a problem.
I would also say that when we make those changes, that things are going to be uncomfortable because it's going against what we expect. So for those of you who want to move together, there's some great conversation in that. So we really want to encourage you, if you haven't watched that, to go out and to watch that. And so they had a DEIJ, or diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice expert on the panel, and she talked about your autopilot. And so the way that we automatically work through life is called our autopilot, and we're working to disrupt that. But whenever somebody else disrupts it for us, we often get mad. So I would also caution you to think about, if you see someone being given a position somewhere that it seems like somebody's voice is being elevated and you don't like it, I would ask some questions of yourself. If you see that someone is moving in a particular way that you don't like, I would ask some questions. And you might come back to your initial response, but you want to always examine that first thought. So for this first action item, it talks about scanning the room. You, once again, thinking beyond your autopilot. When you walk into a room, rather than just going to the person that you most feel comfortable approaching, maybe consider looking at the room and seeing who's dancing and who's not. And I'm going to stop talking and let somebody else pick it up.
I'll chime in on this. So being actively welcoming versus passively welcoming, I think that for a lot of us, we feel it's easy to be passively welcoming, like, oh, hi, if I get in a position where I meet this person, then I can meet them and be cordial to them. Maybe if I'm more likely to know someone, I'm more likely to ask them to dance because there's a comfort there, right? So it's making the change from that to a more active welcoming. And active welcoming, on the one hand, yeah, you want to go up and you want to meet new people. And especially if you see someone who is not being asked to dance, or if you see someone that doesn't look like other people in the room, that's a great opportunity to like say, I need to pay attention to that person and make sure that they feel welcome, maybe get to know them. And obviously you don't want to swarm them. You want to be conscious of their experience. At the same time, if they're sitting in that same chair all night, then that's a great time to go up and engage with them. And I'll add to scanning the room, I'll also add, since we're all partnership dancers, scanning the dance. So like when you ask someone to dance, is take the time at the beginning to figure out what dancing means to them and support that and like have an experience together. I think Valerie just mentioned a great point that she said in the chat. She said, also chat with someone and introduce them to other safe people.
I wanted to mention in our Balboa community, there's often a trope. I'm not going to say whether it's accurate or not, that we tend to attract people who are less socially comfortable or socially inclined. And so therefore, it's going to be on our community to make bigger efforts to do this and to be actively social and welcoming to our community. I know it might be a difficult thing for each individual, but it's something that a step or giving it a try each week is going to be certainly very important every time you go to an event.
Can I, somebody just asked in the chat, how can we be welcoming without being tokenizing? And I think that the line between representation and tokenism is an interesting one. The line between welcoming and or trying to understand and voyeurism is an interesting one. All of these things are a spectrum. I will say though, I'm gonna give an anecdote. There was the Sunday night of Cowbow a couple years ago. It was my first Cowbow. I was sitting in the late night room by myself. And I actually think I did if you know me, you can see when I shift uncomfortably. And I think I like stood by the dance floor, saw that I wasn't gonna dance with anybody, then sat back down, then stood by the dance floor, then sat back down. But I had this whole experience just by myself because my friends had gone to bed, and then like the people who were out on the floor didn't know me. And so I was just kind of like, okay. And Katie Pangburn came and introduced herself and danced with me. That in no way was tokenizing. She saw a person who was out on her own, like flapping in the breeze, introduced herself, danced with me, and then introduced me to Joe. And so then I had great dances and great conversation with people who just genuinely wanted to get to know a person they didn't know. So there wasn't an assumption that they knew me really well. There wasn't this weird need to get to become my best friend. They just simply saw a person who was on their own wanting to dance. And so I think really great intention in those moments carries you further than what you think. So thanks, Allison, for that question.
Another action that we have is keep removing barriers of entry and help stop the revolving door. As someone who has been working on helping the swing dancing scene understand that there are barriers of entries to these dances, I think it's very, very important to realize that the price tag that a lot of these dances come with, and that came to my attention when I started going to events, and I was at a couple events back to back where I noticed that the people who were mostly on the volunteer teams were people of color, and it made me feel really uncomfortable. I mean, honestly, it felt like modern day servitude, because if you look at the distribution of wealth across demographics, people of color are more likely to be affected, and by having just not as much means. And there's a long history to that. We talked about a little bit about both the legalized as well as the social side of how those effects came to be. But recognizing that there are things that you can do, including things like scholarship. Honestly, I want to go ahead and give Desiree the hugest shout out. She's like, we're having this event online. If you need a scholarship, you have a scholarship. Not asking no questions. And it's just recognizing not only people of color who might need help, but also other people too. And that's such a beautiful way to go ahead and help honor this. I also think that by helping stop the revolving door, by forming those connections, by having those relationships, I think that one of the big things that the swing community can do is mentorship as well. If you see a dancer and you feel a connection with them, and you are in a place to go ahead and to try to elevate them and support them, to do that, to engage in that relationship, and to show that care as well as that guidance and the learning on both sides to deepen that connection, I think is one of the things that will actually help stop the revolving door swing scene. It's something that I have felt a big difference in my dance journey, and I think Chisomo is the same.
Right. And that type of mentorship is really something that helps build and diversifies local scenes also. I think, Bal gets a rep as being solely a national scene, but for me personally, I would love to have a stronger local scene. And even within my local scene in Santa Barbara, coming up as a beginning dancer, definitely credit's due. Jonathan and Sylvia gave me leadership responsibilities in the scene that didn't overburden me or didn't feel like extra work, right? It felt like I was being valued and recognized as being a part of our local scene. And, as we look to being more inclusive, both as a national scene and as local scenes, right? That mentorship can play a really huge role.
One of the things that I don't know if anybody wants to piggyback on this is the idea of removing barriers, and one of those barriers being regulating Black bodies on what dances we can and can't be doing, or should and shouldn't be doing, right? We get told that, well, this is a white community and a white dance, so we shouldn't be doing this dance. But these are all rhythm dances. These are all jazz music dances. Any dance is your dance to do it, right? If you want to be respectful and you want to enjoy yourself and respect yourself, do your dance. Stuff.
No, I was saying I've been told that. I've been told that by international Lindy Hop instructors. I've been told such nonsense by international Bal instructors. I've been told that from everyone from on the ground in between of, shouldn't you be doing Lindy? I don't know. Like, why are you doing Bal? That's a white dance. I don't understand. And recognizing that those comments, I actually think that those comments are pervasive and that there's an ideology here, in part because of the history of Balboa, which we have told, which I would say is inaccurate and incomplete, is harmful in and of itself, as well as not only to just all of our general knowledge, but also to the people who are here trying to do these dances who are not in the majority. And by putting those boundaries and telling people what they should or should not be doing based upon their race is wrong. And that is regardless of what race you are. Do you want to go to the next slide? Action. Think about the choices you make when you dance or perform. Question and disrupt your autopilot.
Yeah, so, sorry, hold on. There's a motorcycle outside.
I'll go back to my point about minstrelsy. Whether you're doing this dance or another dance, looking at videos and recreating aesthetics that you haven't taken the time to contextualize in their time, in our time, and so I'll just start there. That's one.
This actually kind of dovetails, I think, Shani, to your point, to a question that Maurice asked. Do you think that representation of Black people in films that we reference for African-American vernacular jazz dances gives off a sense of bias? And then he also asked if the colloquialisms we use to describe Black dancing can be quite harmful if not contextualized with cultural history. I threw a lot out there. If it speaks to anyone, absolutely feel free to answer.
I keep waiting for Bobby to jump in. There you go.
That's right. Oh, there's a motorcycle parade outside my door.
I do think it's interesting, Maurice, to your point and to Shani's point, when we look at what footage that we do have, to realize that there is a history and a context there, and you can honor the amazing dances without necessarily, for example, doing them in blackface, right? Without adding the minstrelsy. So one of the things that we see a lot in these movies is that you see Black people like, oh my God, best thing ever, and they're making all these faces, and they're being that extra awesome Black person. Like, I mean, that in and of itself is a caricature. Ooh, that was hard to say at that moment in time. And recognizing that sometimes when we do those things, or when we ask people to do those things, that we are still engaging in these systems of oppression.
Along those lines, there was a recent series put on by Monsell Durden, and in one of the classes, we went into depth talking about the different archetypes of Black people in media. And if you spend some time looking at the different tropes associated with Black presence in the media, you'll see that basically all of them are racist. So when we talk about our autopilot, it is just inherently racist. The caricatures, the like the exaggeration, all of that is coming from a very, very racist perspective. And so I think spending some time interrogating what it is, interrogating these pieces within ourselves, I think is really important. Once again, I'm going to call us all to take a moment to reflect, and then you can all send me your essays into Bobby.
Yeah, I really quickly just wanted to throw out there, if in your head you think of such a thing as a white swing dance, like in your head they're like, oh, there's such a thing as a white swing dance, especially when we're talking about swing era dances that were made by communities of people. I want to throw this idea at you that think of the qualities in jazz music that also happen to be qualities that are commonly found in Black American artistic values. You have improvisation. You have a spirit of individuality in a yin and yang combination with community and teamwork. You have rhythmic emphasis. You have emphasis on a community in terms of like sharing your dance with that community. Think about jam circles, right? You have innovation and creativity and originality. Like those are values that are inherent in jazz music. And ask yourself, does the Bal-Swing, does Pure Balboa, does Lindy Hop, do they express those values? And I think absolutely, absolutely they can express those values. And that's because it got it from the music and from the community members that were putting it into it. And so that is why, I don't think it's correct to think of a dance like Bal-Swing or Collegiate Shag or Pure Balboa or no one thinks of Lindy Hop or or jazz dance that way. But I don't think it's a correct mind frame to think about, oh, this is a white dance because it expresses those values.
And I think part of that is the loss of that we don't have a lot of history of Black dancers outside of the New York area. And I think it's important from whatever community that you're in to go and see if you can find information about what people of color were doing swing-based dances in your area, because I bet there's a lot more information about their styles, their community, you know, whether they were connected to Lindy Hop or Balboa in California or whatever. We know it's out there. It just needs to be found.
Right, because this was the cool thing. Like, it goes back to what we were saying at the beginning. This was the cool thing done by all the cool kids. The music, as we know, is popping. Like, so many people did this, and to realize that it also happened in your area, and we don't have a lot of information. And so I think it'd be awesome if people went out there and they started looking to see what they could find for their local scenes and other scenes as well.
Yeah. And last, one final comment for me, and I know we need to start to wrap up. Is that this is an imperfect struggle, right? So what we want to do is to invite people, their whole self, into this space. And so by talking about these things, I think we're really aiming to be more inclusive and not necessarily to vilify. And I think a thing to remember is that a tenet of white supremacy, and so I'm throwing out a lot right now, I apologize, but a tenet of white supremacy is perfectionism. Our aim isn't to be more perfect, our aim is to be more inclusive. So this is a conversation of inclusion, not exclusion. So hopefully you have fodder to continue your own journeys and asking questions. That's my final comment.
Stephanie's final thought, and then she can super stop onto Somo's point, is that we need you and to do this. Like, as a community, we need to go ahead and to recognize that we were raised in societies that gave us many oppressive thinkings. If I name almost any group, I guarantee you can tell me what stereotypes we have about them. And to realize that the more we hear something, the more we believe it. We actually start to even agree with things that we don't agree with. Repetition is crazy. And so we have absorbed all these messages, often at an unconscious level. And to recognize that we're all biased and ask ourselves what we can do to not stay silent and to be better, to be better and to help those around us who need those helps. And I'm also going to throw out that that to recognize that this is an ongoing fight and that it's going to be a fight. It unfortunately just is. There's very interesting research when you look at equaling playing fields, that the group that was in the majority and who has been privileged starts to feel like that you're taking something away from them when we do this, and they start to fight back. And so recognize that a lot of what we're talking about has been going on for a long time, that these issues are not new, and that we do have journeys and further to go, but that we need you to overcome and to honestly make this dance as freaking awesome as it should be. Like, let's be honest, we're all here because we love these things and we love this community and we want it to be as great as it can be. Vote for Steffanie. Okay.
Guys, the three of you have final thoughts?
Nico, is he gone off?
No, Nico's here.
I can't see him. Yeah, I think that's it for me. I just really wish more people will come to this dance and find their individual joy in this dance.